When the United States declared war against Germany in April 1917, the War Department realized they desperately needed more men to ensure victory. But blacks in the U.S., eager to prove their patriotism and worthiness for equal treatment, were still being turned away under the belief that African Americans did not have the physical, mental, or moral character to withstand warfare. Still, on June 5, 1917, blacks were among the 9.5 million men marching to register for the draft. At the bottom, the card read, "If a person is an African descent, tear off this corner, the first step in a strictly segregated army." Faith in President Wilson's call to serve was difficult to reconcile with everyday race relations in America. The duality of serving for a country that did not recognize their humanity was a double-edged sword. Eventually, over 200,000 African Americans fought with American expeditionary forces in France, but white American troops refused to fight alongside blacks, even though they were all fighting against the same enemy. Instead, the fully segregated black units fought with the French army and took orders from French commanders, who needed fresh units in their lines. Young black men from all over the country were drawn to a combat-active, all-black regiment from Harlem, the 369th Infantry, nicknamed the Harlem Hellfighters. Serving on the front lines longer than any American unit in the war, the Harlem Hellfighters never lost any prisoners or territory to the enemy. France awarded the entire unit with Croix de Guerre, the country's highest military honor, and 171 members of the regiment were awarded the Legion of Merit. In the lead up to and during World War II, the military continued to maintain that African Americans were not as capable as their white counterparts, especially in leadership. Despite continuing discrimination, more than 1 million African Americans volunteered to serve in the armed forces in the fight against Hitler. In January 1941, the Women's Army Corps changed its policies, allowing black women to join the ranks of Army nurses to strengthen the war efforts. Much like their counterparts, black women were given separate training, inferior living quarters, and rations. As black nurses were integrated into environments with white colleagues, they often felt discrimination and slander from the wounded soldiers they cared for. Still, blacks continued in full service to the military. During the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, mess attendant Doris Miller came to the aid of his shipmates on the USS West Virginia, helping to move the injured out of harm's way, including the mortally wounded captain. Though untrained in its use, Miller manned an anti-aircraft machine gun, downing several Japanese planes before being ordered to abandon the sinking ship. Miller's courage and devotion earned him the Navy Cross, the first ever awarded to an African American sailor. Even in civilian life, black soldiers were subjected to discrimination in the form of a blue discharge or a blue ticket, the military discharge used to disproportionately remove African Americans and homosexual service members. Denied the benefits of the GI Bill, blacks also experienced difficulty finding work because employers were aware of the negative connotations. Following intense criticism, especially the black press, Congress discontinued the blue ticket in 1947. In 1948, President Truman ordered the military establishment to desegregate. Although the Navy and the Air Force accomplished integration by 1950, the Army, with the vast majority of African American servicemen, did not achieve desegregation until after the Korean conflict. Vietnam saw the highest proportion of blacks ever to serve in an American war, marking the first major combat deployment of an integrated military. During Vietnam, African Americans faced a much greater chance of being on the front lines and consequently a much higher casualty rate. In 1965 alone, African Americans represented almost 25% of those killed in action. With U.S. involvement unfolding against the backdrop of the Civil Rights Movement, the need for African American leadership became apparent. but the percentages of African American officers did not change significantly. Delays in racial progress led to racial riots on a number of ships and military bases, including the USS Kitty Hawk. Further violence was dissuaded by Commander Ben Cloud, a half African American, half Native American executive officer. In 1968, the services began responding by creating interracial councils and racial sensitivity training. 40 years after military segregation ended, the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, Colin Powell, ascended to the highest military position in the Department of Defense. General William Kip Ward was officially nominated as the first commander of the United States Africa Command. Carlton Kent and Ronald Greene both served as Sergeant Major of the U.S. Marine Corps. And on January 20th, 2009, Barack Obama was inaugurated as President of the United States, making him the first African American Commander-in-Chief of the United States Armed Forces. African Americans have fought for the United States throughout its history, defending and serving a country that in turn denied their basic right as citizens. As we round the 21st century and face new challenges, the hope is that African American soldiers receive the recognition, respect, and equality they so richly deserve.